Good afternoon. I'm Francine Schertzer, Senior Vice President of Politics and Policy at PCN, President of the Pennsylvania Press Club, and your host for today's luncheon. Joining me at the head table is Barb Huskin from the Pennsylvania News Media Association and Bill Ryan from Saxton and Stump. Thank you for your support and thank you for being here. The Pennsylvania Press Club Luncheon Series could not be possible without the support of the generous organizations listed on our sponsor banner. Today's luncheon is being taped and will be carried throughout the Pennsylvania to the television audience and streaming audience of PCN. Our speaker today is Eugene DePasquale. Eugene DePasquale is the Democratic nominee for Pennsylvania Attorney General and former two-term Auditor General of Pennsylvania. Serving in that role, Mr. DePasquale was the fiscal watchdog for the state of Pennsylvania. He led the effort to expose nearly $2 billion in wasted tax dollars, led the fight to reduce the backlog of thousands of untested rape kits, and exposed 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. Prior to serving as Auditor General, Mr. DePasquale was a three-term member of the General Assembly, representing the 95th District. He was a leader in advocating for public schools and creating a fair education funding formula. He was also the first legislator to post his expenses online and is the author of the Alternative Energy Investment Act and led the fight to ban texting while driving. Mr. DePasquale is a Pittsburgh native. He has a BA from the College of Worcester, Ohio, an MPA from the University of Pittsburgh, and a JD from Widener University School of Law. Mr. DePasquale is currently an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh, York College of PA, and Widener University School of Law. Mr. DePasquale is also counsel for several organizations and is co-chair of the Energy Future PA. Mr. Eugene DePasquale.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to PCN for the coverage and for everyone for taking the time out of your day. And for those of you that are wondering, no, I am staying in Pennsylvania. I will not be in Chicago campaigning across the state. So again, thank you. I want to be your Attorney General. I've been out of public life for a couple years, but I thought the challenges that exist both in our state and our country needed people to step up and fight for what they believe in. And so I came out of what you would call public life retirement, not actual retirement, to run for this office because I believe my skills uniquely could help serve the people of this state. Part of that is I've already led a complicated state agency. And part of that leadership was conducting thousands, average of 5,000 a year, of complicated investigations to root out waste, fraud, and abuse, to protect Pennsylvanians, and to make sure every Pennsylvanian had an opportunity for a better life. Francine talked about it, but I think it's important to highlight some of those because they were tough and fair. And I'll start off with the tough and fair because when the Philadelphia Inquirer endorsed me in the primary, even though I had four very tough, good, qualified opponents in the primary, their reasoning was, A, they had said I had won statewide twice before, and that wasn't to be, ignored. But more importantly, that particularly in these polarized partisan times, we need someone to be the Attorney General who isn't a partisan warrior. And that's what I begin to offer you. Some of this, makes people a little bit uncomfortable, but I was tough and fair on a Republican governor, and I was tough and fair on a Democratic governor. It was during COVID that I even investigated the Wolf administration to find out what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong so that we can protect people but also not harm our economy. I was the first legislator, I think in the state, if not I was second or third, that even as a Democratic backbencher in my first term, once the bonus gate scandal erupted, called on the Democratic leadership to step aside. And it was during both the first 2 years of the Corbett administration where I called on their lax efforts to adequately protect water across Pennsylvania through the excess drilling and not having enough staff and regulations, to even the Wolf administration not doing enough on Childline. And those are the investigations I want to start with because it was my investigation that found over 3,000 untested rape kits. The horror that those victims had to go through. But one of the things that I think some people say it as a compliment, some maybe not, but when I find a problem, I really don't care. I mean it. Who is between me and finishing the job? So we went through every single police department, every single agency, we went through every single county resource, and we got that information out, we cleared that backlog, we got all that information into the FBI database, and we brought justice to victims. It was my investigation that found 58,000 unanswered phone calls at the child abuse hotline. Any single one of those calls could have been life or death for a child. But it wasn't enough for myself and my team to find that problem. I went to every single county in this state, meeting with child caseworkers to find out what they needed to better protect our children. And I won't mention their names, although they're going to be on the finance report. They didn't give a lot of money, but I appreciate every dime they did. But when I started my announcement tour, I was in Clarion County. I think some of them were even Republican, but they were child caseworkers. They came to that announcement because of that report. They said, because I specifically pointed out, in some counties, you have kids, when I say kids, people younger than some of us, making, at that time, poverty wages with master's degrees tasked with protecting our children. And that was some of what I exposed. So even in Clarion County today, they went from $8 an hour to about $18 an hour. They're actually able to have a family-sustaining job now while having more resources and better tools to better protect our children. It was also my investigation into what I believe are these sham organizations called crisis pregnancy centers, one of them called Real Alternatives. Now, regardless of where you stand on the issue of choice, to me, it is wrong to lie to pregnant women about what the health consequences are of the choices they may or may not make. And to use Pennsylvania tax dollars to try to build that business in states like Michigan, Arizona, and Colorado. My exposing that led to Governor Shapiro about a year ago canceling that contract. Better protecting women and better protecting taxpayers. And it was also in schools. I know a lot of people talk about my work on the charter schools, but it's also tough on traditional public schools as well. Penn Hills School District out in Pittsburgh, Woodland Hills School District out in Pittsburgh, and even hammering away at the Philadelphia School District for having $40,000 in unused textbooks in their basement, while at the same time looking to raise taxes. And that's some of the work I did in conducting tough investigations regardless of party or favor as your Auditor General. But I do believe my personal story is one that probably even more relates me to this office than almost any office that anyone could run for. See, on October 5th, 1969, my dad was in Cambodia. They said Vietnam, but it was actually Cambodia, and there's a point to that story later on. He was shot twice in the right leg, once in the left. He eventually was prescribed synthetic heroin by the VA, which led to an over 30-year battle with addiction. Eventually him dealing, and eventually a 10.5-year federal prison sentence. I am seeking to become the first child of a convicted felon, elected Attorney General in Pennsylvania history, and only the second nationally. What that did teach me was both sides of the criminal justice system, how we don't take care of our vets when they come back, and the United States war on drugs is the most failed war in the history of the United States, and we must turn it into a battle against addiction. I also know what it's like. I also know what it's like to struggle because we didn't have health insurance when I was a kid. This led to the commentary yesterday that the Trump-Vance team are full of jagoffs. I'll get to that in a second. See, Obamacare is not perfect. It's not, and it should be reformed and made better. I think that even President Obama would say that. When they passed it, the whole idea was you'd keep working on it and refine it. It's become too politicized. I get that. But when I was a kid, we weren't able to have health insurance because my brother had muscular dystrophy. We weren't able to buy health insurance. Let me repeat, weren't able to buy it. Imagine having an incarcerated father, mother working paycheck, I'm putting myself through night law school, and your brother passes away from complications with muscular dystrophy, and there's no health insurance. That story is not alone. Tens of thousands, if not millions of people before the ACA had to deal with that. Either the taxpayers picked it up through Medicaid reimbursement to the hospital system, the hospitals just maybe ate it in some instances, or people just went bigger and bigger into debt. As your Attorney General, I will make sure that people have that access. I'll hold the insurance companies accountable, and I'll work with the hospital industry, both being tough and fair. But the biggest thing is making sure people hear that story to know what happens if you can't have health insurance. And that's a personal story that I know because I lived it. My dad had to come to the funeral in shackles. We had to take out loans and borrow money from family and friends just to pay for the funeral. We should not have that in the United States, and we should not go back to that. And I know a lot of people don't always feel comfortable talking about the choice issue, but after Dobbs, Tracy and I talked about this, and she's like, no, you got to go talk about this now. See, for those of you that are friends of mine on Facebook, and they cap that at 5,000 of your closest, most personal friends. That's supposed to be a joke. So I'd make it 6. If some of you are in the waiting list, I would add up. Not my rules. Let's see. Before we had Ben, our oldest. So Ben is our oldest. He's 24. He's killing it at grad school at Georgetown, and our daughter Sarah is at Temple. She's doing great. She is playing with Shadow until classes start. Shadow is the cat, and she bought him a toy lobster, and Shadow loves the toy lobster. But before we had Ben, we had at week 10 in the fall of 1998 an ectopic pregnancy. Let me repeat it, week 10. That matters. Tracy was bleeding internally, had to make a decision. Fortunately, we were only 7 minutes away from the hospital. If you're in Elk County today, you're not 7 minutes from the hospital. That's a separate problem. We were 7 minutes. Dr. Ross lays out the options, which in our view, there was none. You want to have kids? Do you want to survive? Here's the choice. It was technically an abortion at week 10. In the states of Florida, Texas, Utah, Oklahoma, Idaho, today we go to prison for that. That's not an intellectual exercise. In Boise, Idaho, they are life-flighting women that need this to Boulder, Colorado for that procedure. So I've always want to make it clear, because some people say, why would that middle-aged 53-year-old dude care so much about choice? I know what we had the right to then. I will fight to make sure you have the right to that now, not just if you're in Pennsylvania, but for anyone fleeing one of these right-wing authoritarian states that need to come here for their reproductive freedom. I will protect their reproductive freedom as well. Now we're in a campaign. It's Pennsylvania. The tone of the campaign is a little different than it was June 27th, where my daughter sent me a text 3 minutes into that debate. There was something along the lines of, I told you. She said it with some other colorful language, something to the effect of, I keep trying to tell you the young people aren't going to vote for this. Well, now they're fired up and ready to run through walls. But it is Pennsylvania. It's always going to be close. That's one of the reasons why I'm staying back here and not blowing $5,000 on a hotel room in Chicago. It's not that I don't love Chicago, and if the Cubs are there, I always don't mind getting to see a game at Wrigley, but I'm going to keep fighting for every single vote here. I believe my record is one that has comprehensive ability to protect the public. Protecting consumers, my work on prescription drug reform, my work protecting the environment, protecting clean air and clean water, holding administrations accountable, conducting tough investigations, regardless of friend or foe, fighting for veterans by investigating our veterans' homes in Pennsylvania, making sure our seniors are better protected by investigating the nursing home industry, and making sure that our kids are protected in Pennsylvania in fighting for reproductive freedom. That's what I offer you as your Attorney General. Within the next couple months, the choice will be up to you. No one will work harder for you, and I promise you this, if elected, I will never let you down. Thank you very much. And I believe I'm allowed to answer any questions, right?
Some questions from the audience. What is the number one issue facing Pennsylvanians, and how would you address it if elected?
Yeah, so there is probably three prongs. One is clearly before we get to, we have to make sure that we have a free and fair square election and making sure that the votes are counted fairly. That's number one. And if I'm elected, whoever is the next, will still be inheriting some of those lawsuits that are inevitable. So you got to make sure that it's a fair election. That will not necessarily be up to Dave or me, but certainly when it comes to managing the lawsuits going through, making sure that whoever the voters wanted to win Pennsylvania, that's who's declared the winner. That's job one. Beyond that, made it clear, we have to have public safety, we have to protect consumers, we have to protect reproductive freedom. In the world of public safety, that's working with our DAs to make sure they have the resources to protect our communities, that's working to crack down on illegal gun violence, also making sure that our consumers are protected and the environment is protected. There's a lot of different ways to protect the community. Reproductive freedom, I've outlined that here as well, and the environment. The Pennsylvania Constitution says you have the constitutional right to clean air and pure water. To me, that's not a talking point. There's a reason why the voters voted for that. That's in there for a reason. It's important for public health. And finally, certainly I know there's been a lot of talk about giving the Attorney General more authority when it comes to the healthcare industry. I want to use the tools when it comes to healthcare giants buying up more. I want to make sure that we're not doing that and freezing competition out. I'm very concerned about that. Now, having said that, you only have the tools you have. The legislature's talking about giving more tools to actually stop hospital mergers. If that doesn't happen, then I have to use the tools on stopping monopolies and making sure that the hospitals comply with their nonprofit status.
How would you differentiate yourself from your opponent?
I do think, and this isn't often I say this, but I have better hair, for starters. No, look, Dave's a good guy. I'd like to think I am. That's up to other people. Dave's a good guy. He takes it as this is just about prosecuting. I believe this job is much more. I believe it is about protecting the community, working with the DAs, important public safety, cracking down on gun violence. I believe that is part of the job. And I have a record of protecting the community. But I also believe consumer rights, protecting seniors, protecting the environment, and using this as a tool for good across the board is also part of the job. I have a very similar background to our current governor, now former Attorney General Josh Shapiro, in running for this office and in holding this office, if I'm so fortunate. Our backgrounds are very similar. I believe he started to make the case and started to take us there on a bigger role for this office. I want to take that role and take it even further. Working with other state AGs across the country on clean air initiatives, clean water initiatives, working with other state AGs regarding the opioid epidemic. We have an opioid settlement now. We may need to revisit that at some point down the line, holding drug manufacturers accountable. Utilizing that money to make sure that it's going to the right resources. I investigated all the drug rehabilitation programs in the state. I know what works and what doesn't. If the money goes into something that is 28 days, you might as well light that money on fire. We need to get people in rehab for at least 90 days. That is what I bring to you as the Attorney General. So the biggest difference is I view it as public safety and all the other items. And I know how to run a complicated state agency, and I know how to run complicated state investigations.
When it comes to health care, why is there so much attention paid to the money when the problem is a resource issue? There are no reasonable options for small business owners.
Look, we spend more money in the United States on health care than anybody else, and we're not getting healthier. And that's not an ideological point. I think there is a failure of left, right, and center on that. Let me repeat, we spend more than anybody else, and we're getting less healthy. So clearly something is wrong here. And I don't think it's because the nurses and doctors aren't trying their best. And I gotta say this, as much as I can be tough on them, I think people in the hospital executive, they're trying their best too. There is a failure in the system comprehensively. I think we are not doing enough of there's a book called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. It's called Outlive. Now, he's a Stanford-trained medical doctor, did his residency at Hopkins, now has a practice in Austin. But he talks about we have to shift from medicine 2.0 to medicine 3.0, which is catching things before they happen. We are very good in the United States when somebody has a heart attack of getting them, if possible, back up and functioning. We're very good. We're very good at extreme surgery. We're very good when we get someone that has enough time, cancer treatment. We're very good at that in the United States. We're horrible at preventive. Horrible. And that, to me, we've got to do a better job of allocating resources to the preventative side, getting younger people in, getting their checkups more often. If somebody is on a path to obesity, finding ways to give them tactics so that they can manage that when they're younger. It's not about dehumanizing them, but it is about, it is a problem in the United States that leads to a lot of health consequences. So again, I think we do great at the end of life, and we do great when something severe happens. We need to dramatically improve at the preventative stage. There are limited tools for the Attorney General in that role, but where it works, that I do want to make sure that I'm making the case for that.
Governor Josh Shapiro was criticized for the lack of urgency and transparency handling sexual harassment in his office. How would you do things differently?
Well, I was so popular for all the press conferences that I had that the Republicans cut my budget $4.1 million. So my hallmark has always been from day one, I'm going to be transparent. I co-authored the Open Records Law, first legislator to post my expenses online, became the first, I got to be clear, second statewide elected official in the United States to post expenses online. The Alaskan governor beat me to the punch. Thank God it wasn't Sarah Palin. That would have been a shot to the ego. When it comes to that, look, I think anyone that leads a large agency, whether it be public or private, could have something happen on their watch. I think there is obviously legal protections for parties involved, but I believe where appropriate, the public should know as much as humanly possible.
The issue of gun violence and some of your votes regarding the right to use deadly force in the House were brought up during the primary. What are your views on red flag laws, universal background checks, and enforcement of gun laws?
Yeah, I strongly believe that you have a right to protect yourself in your home. And I got some flack from some friends on the left for that. That's fine. That's politics, I get it, but I started to argue against, the duty to retreat in your own home in law school. I thought it didn't make sense then. Don't think it makes sense now. Someone breaks into your home, and again, I don't own a firearm, but if someone breaks into your home, I believe you have a right to defend yourself. Also, when we were doing that, not only did I work with that, but I worked with Republicans, including Scott Perry, to make sure that it did not become more than that, where you then have these laws that exist now in Florida and others that led to the death of Trayvon Martin and others, where it happens out in the public. To me, there's a huge difference between the right to protect your home and the duty to retreat in your home versus whether you should do that out on the streets or out in public. So I think that record has shown that in Pennsylvania we've had limited issues that other states have had on that. I think history will judge that we made, in a bipartisan way, the right call to find ways to make sure people could better protect themselves in their home and not lead to shootouts across the state. I do believe that we need to crack down on ghost guns. I think the governor, when he was Attorney General, did a great job on that. I support red flag laws. 2/3 of all firearm deaths in Pennsylvania are the result of suicide. 2/3. The big shootings get a lot of press, and I get it. We're all horrified when we see it. But 2/3 of all firearm deaths in Pennsylvania are the result of suicide. Red flag laws will help crack down on that. And we also need to make sure we're getting people, again, the help they need. I think it's never going to be perfect. And anyone that comes up here and tells you it's their three-point plan to do something is going to be perfect is missing the boat, or they're lying to you. But I think if we do all of those, try to, when someone needs help, temporarily take away their ability to have access to a firearm while they, and again, through an appropriate legal process, temporarily, make sure people get mental health treatment, particularly our vets, because every single day in the United States, certainly in Pennsylvania, veterans are taking their own life because they didn't get the help when they came back. It's unacceptable.
What is your opinion of skill games?
To me, a skill game is trying to hit a 95-mile-per-hour fastball I think that takes a lot of skill. Pool takes a lot of skill. Not very good at that. And I know where you're going with this. I think they need to be regulated. I'm not overall, I've never played them. I know that some people, I'm not a big gambler. I have done some fantasy football from time to time. But I do think they need to be regulated. I think the legislature should make sure that they are working in the best interest of the public. I think the governor had a good plan on the table, and both sides should negotiate to get that. My biggest concern is making sure kids don't have access to them. When I say kids, meaning, under 18. I'm not totally comfortable with their proliferation in what seems now every corner of the state. That's a me issue. I'm not saying that should apply as the law, but I'm personally not comfortable with that. But they should be regulated. There should be a tax on them. And I believe we got to make sure kids don't have access to it. Beyond that, a lot of people want to do it. It's not my choice, but a lot of people want to do it. And I recognize that adults have the right to do that.
As Auditor General, you reported on anticipated missed revenue from not legalizing and taxing marijuana in Pennsylvania. Do you see that sending a mixed message with the Attorney General's role of enforcing laws against illegal drugs?
No. I don't think we should be incarcerating people for marijuana. I think it should be legal. Again, I give this sort of like, it's not my thing. When I first came out with that position, I think there's a pro-marijuana newspaper now. It wasn't exactly, when you're a kid, you want to be an astronaut or play in the major leagues. They said, you're the perfect spokesperson for us. I said, why? He said, you're so boring. So I was like, oh my, so Fetterman more looks the part than me on this. But no, we should be regulating and taxing cannabis. I think by regulating and taxing it, you actually make it safer. You get some of the dangerous chemicals that are popping into the street out of it. The reality is, let's be clear, people are doing this. We're now losing out revenue because other states around us have gone in that direction. And to me, as Attorney General, I enforce the law, but I get to weigh in on where I believe the law is. And I believe we should move in a different direction on marijuana, but that does not also mean that you can't keep what I believe are some of these more harmful products illegal. Now, let's just say it, cigarettes are incredibly dangerous too and lead to a whole host of health issues. We regulate and tax them, we should be regulating and taxing marijuana.
One last question. If your race ends in a tie, will you settle it with a Spartan race or a Tough Mudder?
No, that's a great question. I'm going to go with, I think it should be a Spartan race because I think I'd have a distinct advantage there. But having it be one or the other would be, Dave and I would become household figures across the world. That would finally be must-see TV, and if we do it on PCN, you'll have the highest ratings ever.
We'd like to thank Eugene DePasquale and wish him well. We have some mementos for him. These gifts are compliments of PCN and the Pennsylvania Press Club. And in closing...
And I'm not in office right now, so the gift ban doesn't apply.
In closing, we want to thank you for being with us. Our next luncheon is Monday, September 23rd. Our guest will be former Governor Tom Corbett. For scheduling information, visit our website, www.papressclub.org. Thank you, everyone.